And now, Indian Army former Chief of the Army Staff General Bikram Singh in an exclusive conversation since the big story. Here he is live with Rahul Kanwal.
So welcome. There's been a lot of conversation about China's motives and trying to understand why China has built up positions at different positions along the India-China border in the manner that it has. What we hope to do over the next several minutes is to try and peek into the Chinese military mind and try and understand why they're making the kind of maneuvers and the kind of deployments that they are. But to try and put this in context before that, I want to show you the build-up that we now have satellite imagery to demonstrate. And remember, we were already on open source satellite pictures showing you a general sense of the area where the clash took place. Now we have satellite imagery of the exact spot of confrontation. Remember, this is Flashpoint Galwan, the PP-14, which is the patrol point 14, where the current face-off between the Indian and the Chinese armies took place. These are satellite pictures that we have accessed from Planet Labs. It's one of the world's top satellite imagery companies. And this image, which doesn't look like very much, is actually magical, because as I zoom in, and you'll see that in a moment, you will see Chinese deployment. But before that, I just want to show you where we are at. So you have a locational context. This is the Galwan River in blue. It merges here. There's a confluence with the Shyok River. These are the Indian Army permanent positions. The Indian Army, after they saw that the Chinese Army had come here, sent in reinforcements and there was a build-up. Then the Indian Army pulled back because that was the promise that the Chinese had made. They did. And the Chinese Army was supposed to pull back here. The way the Chinese Army was supposed to pull back is that they came along this dirt track and then going back on this tarred road to the Chinese posts, which are part of the People's Liberation Army's Huvishan base. So the Chinese were supposed to pull back. That's the promise that they made. To see whether that had happened or not, Colonel Babu and his troop went to PP-14, where there were two tent structures which could be seen, and the Chinese were refusing to take that down. Now what you need to see in the images, remember this is the Flashpoint 14. So if you see broadly, this is the flashpoint that I'm now coming to, which corresponds to this area. So this rough area is Flashpoint 14, and if you start zooming in, you will see in just a minute from now some Chinese tents, some Chinese build up here, which they were supposed to take back, but they didn't. That is part of the current problem. As you go further back, even more Chinese tents, which again they were supposed to have taken back, but they refused to, and that's what the Indian Army and the Bihar battalion was concerned about. More Chinese tents. But the moment you come back around this bend, you look here at the intensity of the Chinese build-up. Now on your screen, you can see starting from here, going all the way along the river basin. This is the Galwan River. Look at the number of Chinese troops that have been deployed. Now some of these are hutments where you've got the soldiers and the officers staying. Some of them are for equipment, some of them are for vehicles, some of them are ammunition dumps. But you can see here the intensity of the Chinese build-up, very close to the line of actual control, in Chinese area for certain, but very close to the line of actual control, the kind of Chinese build-up. Now, it doesn't end here. Go back even more. Go back even more, and you will see one more hugely intense Chinese build-up. Caught on your screen, there it is, and there's nothing that, the Chinese have nothing to say. With the kind of technology that the army has access to, which India Today has now been able to put out. Our colleague Ankit Kumar got this from Planet Labs. There's no dispute. The Chinese have not disengaged in the way that they promised that they would. In the midst of all of this, I'm now getting information that the Indian government is looking at restricting the kind of commercial projects that Chinese companies can do. So we're looking at weaponizing trade and commerce with China. Rahul Srivastav is our national affairs editor. He joins us on this broadcast. Rahul, what can you tell us? Chinese companies bidding for multiple Indian infrastructure manufacturing products. What's the thinking and the decision that's been taken by the Indian government, Rahul?
Rahul, till now the incursions, due to the incursions, the government of India was not considering getting provoked into a strong knee-jerk reaction. But the incidents day before yesterday night have totally changed the picture. What we can say, tell our viewers, that there is now a serious serious trouble in store for Chinese stakes in Indian infrastructure projects. What we are being told that infrastructure projects in which work allocation has not been given to the company which has made a successful financial bid, there the Chinese will face major no ease of doing business. Top sources have confirmed to India today, Rahul, that the Delhi Meerut MRTS project, in which a Chinese company had won the bid, the company is called Shanghai Tunnel Engineering Company Limited, STEC. The financial bids were opened on the 12th of June. The L1, that means that the first contender, the lowest bid was made by this Chinese company. That bid is under study and it could well be scrapped by the government. Various entities, including the RSS, had protested against it. That project, that bid is likely to cancel. So Chinese interest and stakes in Indian projects are going to suffer because of what has happened in the Galwan area. The second important element, Rahul, there are several technical qualifications which are added to tenders and processes for projects which actually don't favor the Indian entities while they favor the Chinese entities, because Chinese entities have a lot of a global experience in the past for building those kind of projects, and they become disqualifiers for Indian companies. And that is why the rules and eligibility criteria of these kind of infrastructure projects are going to change. The government is going to get into screening of projects, screening of financial bids. There are going to be filters for Chinese companies. The incidents in Galwan day before yesterday night are not going to be bring good news for Chinese company and their business interests in India.
Okay. So that's the decision that's been taken, and that's very substantial, because in some senses you're sending out a very strong message that Chinese companies can't just come in and can't just keep expecting that the red carpet will be laid out for them and that they can bid for projects and they can grow richer, and while they continue with the military build-up. Now this, Rahul, is complicated because in the manner in which China's economy has been slowing down, they've got huge excess capacity, they've got massive unemployment. As a result of the recession, global economies have slowed down. But at this moment, the Chinese would, over the next 10-15 years, covet the Indian market, and the Indian market would be one of the key engines of growth for the Chinese economy. Blocking that market out is really one of the strongest non-military weapons that the Indian government has, and it's great for the whole idea of an Atmanirbhar Bharat, where if you can't import cheap from China, yes, there will be many disruptions as a result of it, but at least over a period of time, you'll build your own capacities.
Rahul, there was a sense of worry because of the trade imbalances with China, that India was worried that if strong economic measures are taken, China might get unhappy. But the incidents which have happened day before yesterday have perhaps the Chinese have crossed that Lakshman Rekha of tolerance that Indian government had. And that is why if you see what was a slow process, in April, if you recall, Government of India changed the rules for FDI for neighboring nations, specifically targeting China. Then the procurement rules are part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, Rahul, if you recall, was changed. The tendering below 200 crore rupees will not go for global. It will be only for Make India manufacturers. I am in the process of confirming lot of other measures, Rahul, which various ministries are in the process of working out, that it is if China is going to flex its military might on India, India can flex its economic might and its strength as being one of the largest market, and also a country with a potential to, if not completely match China, but become a major threat as far as becoming a manufacturing hub is concerned. And that is why the Atmanirbhar Bharat project, and even yesterday when the Prime Minister spoke to the Chief Ministers, the idea was to get economy back on rails, start manufacturing, start producing better, and become a manufacturing challenge to China.
Okay, Shiv Arur is also with us. Shiv, you've been speaking to many military strategists inside government and outside. What's the thinking on what is the game plan that's at play in Beijing when you deploy troops in the manner in which the Chinese have? And we're just showing you one flashpoint at this time. What seems to be the thinking that's at play in Beijing, Shiv?
Very clear messaging from Beijing being interpreted by the Indian military, Rahul, that first of all, nothing can be kept to chance. Mobilizations will have to be ramped up. That's something that we're likely to see all along the line of actual control, and directly expect provocations in other sectors, be it Uttarakhand, be it Sikkim, where we have already seen some provocations, and most notably in Arunachal Pradesh. It's very likely that the Chinese, could provoke there as well. It may not be with the same intensity as what we've seen in Ladakh, but given the atmosphere that has a spillover effect owing to what happened on the night of June the 15th, top military observers, including serving personnel in the army, say expect the Chinese to try and provoke in other areas as well, and dismiss it as a spillover of troop sentiment on the ground, localized pinpricks, etc., etc. That could very easily happen. The fact that talks have been completely a failure as far as avoiding situations like the one that happened on the night of June the 15th is precisely what is the danger right now. And with emotions running high, everything becomes totally localized. You've got units between the Indian and Chinese armies which are at an eyeball-to-eyeball situation, even beyond these 4 standoff points in Ladakh, Rahul. As you well know, you've reported from those as well. And therefore, to keep emotions calm, to continue the engagement, diplomatically speaking, but the army says, we're keeping our powder dry, no matter what happens. Lesson learned. Handshakes can happen at the highest levels, but expect provocations and the need to act as soon as we, detect them.
That we've heard, which is very, very crucial, is that the Indian army has been given the go-ahead to start stocking up and start making emergency purchases if that is required. Now, whether this is about deployment of assets or ensuring that they have adequate permission to very quickly expedite any kind of weapon purchase or at least ammunition replenishment shift. So some of those permissions also now seem to be coming through. The government seems to be cranking this up one gear.
Absolutely, Rahul. Certain special powers, certain discretionary powers have been ramped up. Not very surprising at all, given the unprecedented situation. And I imagine, following the Cabinet Committee on Security that will be meeting on this, and the Prime Minister's all-party meet, the command and control structure within the military will have already passed down orders that any supplies required, any supply lines that need to be speeded up in terms of ammunition, in terms of, weaponry, men, materials, anything at all, there will be absolutely no problem, because this is an issue that all of India is looking at. It couldn't get worse than 20 plus Indian army soldiers having been slaughtered in this manner, with casualties on the Chinese side as well. This is the last step before an all-out conflict between both sides. As Brahma Chelani said, this is actually many steps worse than Kargil. So there's no option now except to completely be prepared. Nobody wants war. The Indian and Chinese side hopefully don't want war. India certainly doesn't want war, but it will do everything it can to avoid that war. But the provocations are definitely coming. That's one thing I'm hearing from everybody in the Indian Army, Rahul.
The other thing that becomes very clear as you see these satellite pictures is the fact that the Chinese refuse to pull back. Now here you see the overall area. Now, they were supposed to have gone back along the river valley of the Galwan. They were supposed to have pulled back, and that's what they haven't done, because this is the same area. This is the same area that's marked out. In this, as I zoom in, you will see the kind of deployment that there is. And the thing, Shiv, is it's not as if only India today has access to these satellite images. The army has access to far more intense, far more minute, far more intricate real-time satellite imagery. And therefore, if the Chinese think that this is 1962 where they can claim something and do something else, they are being caught out by our eyes in the sky.
The eyes in the sky have certainly snapped, what this is. I imagine that the Indian Army was well aware of the presence there. It's, the presence has been established by these satellite images, but the Indian Army had perhaps approached the last weekend since the Lieutenant General level talks with the intention and with the with the expectation that the Chinese were planning to disengage, precisely what we're seeing in those pictures. That is territory that India claims as its own in the Galwan Valley. China has, tried to completely turn that on its head and say the Galwan Valley has always been, Chinese Tibetan territory. But be that as it may, these images establish a very premeditated nature as far as Chinese intentions is concerned. And this is one of the biggest things in security circles right now, Rahul. The very fact that China, even while those two generals were shaking hands in Chushul, Moldo, was very likely mobilizing some of those camps and some of those vehicles. So it's almost like, I'm going to shake your hand, but about 100 kilometers from where I'm shaking your hand, I know my trucks are moving in exactly the opposite direction from what you're expecting. That's what's really happened here.
How does the Indian government perceive this? Because they've been really caught out. For the longest time, they were expecting that this would be a usual border face-off, that the Chinese would pull back. The Chinese have very clearly not pulled back, and now is the thinking in government as well changing shift to some extent? The fact that now we have to accept there have been at least 20 soldiers dead, that toll I'm certain is unfortunately likely to go up. And therefore the government's calling also for an all-party meeting to try and communicate to the opposition and try and keep them united and in line with this larger national cause.
Let's be clear, Rahul, everything has changed in the last 48 hours. Half a century of history between the two countries has completely been turned on its head. If this was a clash in which, two sides had injured each other's soldiers, it could be dismissed as actually a success of the border tranquility agreement. But we're looking at casualties in excess of 30, between 30 and 50, a total on both sides, means everything is off. All bets are off between India and China, and the Indian government has to look at this completely differently. Its entire thinking as far as China is concerned has to completely change, and that, I imagine, is why the all-party meeting is taking place. There will be a cabinet committee on security meeting precisely on this issue as well. Every single border mechanism, is lying in tatters in one corner right now, and half a century of tentative peace with a border dispute, has gone to the dogs. So at this point of time, moving forward, there will be a huge amount of expectations, but policy-wise, this is going to be in a great deal of flux, Rahul. A very dynamic situation. I imagine the mandarins in government will also be trying to digest and formulate what those next steps really are. And I also want to quote what Brahma Chilani, one of the most astute observers, said. He said, for a month, there has been a lot of beating around the bush. Analysts have said that, the Chinese will never escalate this into all-out aggression. And these were people, like India Today's pictures have proven, were prepared for all-out war. That's what it establishes.
Ankit Kumar is from the India Today open source investigation team. He's been in contact with Planet Labs constantly over the last several months, and I just really want to pay compliments to him for having scooped these pictures just a day after, hours after this brutal confrontation, to have this kind of detailing, which really, there's no briefing that's required, there are no sources that are required. When you see pictures like this, marking out the kind of Chinese deployment that these pictures carry, they speak their own picture. Then beyond that, there's no playing down what's happening or playing up or making it seem as if things are the way they aren't. The pictures speak for themselves, and they speak very loudly. Ankit, from what you've been able to gather by speaking to experts who understand satellite imagery, these boxes that can be seen, they basically from the top, from the sky, just look like matchsticks. What are these matchsticks? What have we been able to understand about the kind of deployment, men and machines, that the Chinese army have brought forth?
Well, Rahul, these images, what they are explicitly telling us is that China actually used the time of de-escalation to build up its troop in guise of de-escalation. Now, the highlight of these images is the diplomatic screw job on part of China. You remember last week, Chinese Foreign Ministry went on record and said that both India and China have reached an agreement on properly handling the situation, and both sides were taking actions in line of this agreement. Now, if you watch these images carefully, these high-resolution images, you can actually count the number of vehicles, etc. If you start counting these vehicles, you can easily count as much as 200 military vehicles on the Chinese side, which is much more than the Indian buildup. Remember, this was not the case about 10 days back when India was matching the Chinese buildup in this very Galwan River Valley. India actually started to take a step back only when an understanding of sorts was reached. So if you see the publicly available low resolution images, you can see that the matchup of Chinese buildup on the other side of LSE and the Indian buildup on the Indian side of LSE was almost equal. But these high resolution images, through these images you can actually conclude that during the period of last 7 to 10 days, India, while following the de-escalation process, reduced number of its troops. China used the same time to increase number of its troops in the river valley. Now remember, this is the Galwan River Valley, and Abhishek will tell you that this is one point where China actually agreed to de-escalate. There is another standoff going on at the Pangong Lake, where China is not agreeing to de-escalate. Now, if this is what de-escalation means, you can well gather what must be Chinese plan going on in the Pangong Tso River. What these Chinese images, what these satellite images are showing us is that the Chinese leadership, including the PLA and the Chinese Foreign Ministry, are not to be trusted in any case. See, we are not expert in diplomacy and strategic affairs, but the evidence from ground suggests that the Chinese have aggression on their mind. They have no intention to de-escalate. And through these images, we can conclude that China has used last 10 days time to double its troop on ground, which can be easily concluded through these images. Rahul?
Okay, Gaurav Sawant has now landed in Ladakh. Leh is the headquarters of the 14 Corps. 14 Corps is, and I'll just show this to you on the map. 14 Corps is the Indian fighting formation that is supposed to take on the Chinese army in the Leh area. And Gaurav, so welcome to Leh. You've got a long haul ahead of you. We're learning that there were some aerial sorties that were carried out as a tribute to the 20 soldiers of the Indian army who were martyred by the Chinese. What have you been picking up from your sources in the Army's 14 Corps?
Rahul, the Indian Air Force has been flying a number of combat air patrols and, of course, a tribute to the 20 braves who made the supreme sacrifice of their lives. And there is considerable build-up all across there is a single access that leads to this place, and from here to the area that we are talking about, both Pangong Tso and Galwan Valley. And there is a considerable build-up on the Indian side, because as these satellite images accessed exclusively by India today indicate, the way Ankit was saying, 1, China cannot be trusted. 2, China has used the period of dialogue to build up its forces. 3, India had a better build-up in some of these areas. India de-escalated in good faith. The Chinese resorted to typical deceit that they showed they were disengaging. They disengaged a bit and then came in larger numbers, almost as if there was a plan. And there is much more information that's now in public domain, Rahul, that we've been able to access through sources about how the Chinese targeted the commanding officer of the 16th Battalion of the Bihar Regiment and the soldiers. Again, it was in good faith that our soldiers went to verify their de-escalation, and through deceit, they came, pitched new tents, brought in more vehicles and targeted our troops and came in deeper while chasing own troops who were there unarmed and in good faith, Rahul.
Okay, and also the critical question at this time is, what will the army do next? Remember, there's already a massive build-up on the Chinese side. India will move in troops as well because we first disengaged. So we pulled back after first getting together in big numbers, then we pulled back, the Chinese refusing to do so. Gaurav, what's the sense that you're picking up about the mobilization along the line of actual control to counter the mischief the Chinese seem up to?
You know, Chinese mischief can get them thus far and no further, is what sources are telling India today. Their deceit and treachery, 1, it's now caught on camera. 2, it's also shown us that the Chinese are not coming to the dialogue table with a clean hand and a clean, heart. So even as the dialogue continues, there are brigade commander level dialogues and conversations that are happening even as we speak. This is to get them to disengage They've hardened their stance. They are now claiming the entire Galwan Valley region. You've heard their foreign office, and they are now claiming additional territory, which India will not permit. India is deployed in adequate numbers, not just here, but elsewhere. The moment the Chinese intention is clear, like you well know, there are no saints at the line of actual control, Rahul.
Okay, so we're slipping into a quick break. We're also in the middle of a corona pandemic, and that's one of the realities of the situation that we're dealing with. So we need to clear out our floor so that we can have some sanitation exercise carried out over the next half hour. But Shiva Aroor is in another building where his studio and his team will continue bringing you the news. We'll be back at 3 p.m. but Shiva and his team will continue tracking these satellite images and all the latest developments on the biggest face-off between two militaries since the India-Pakistan-Kargil war. We're in a tense time, and what we're trying to do is bring you all the information as best as we possibly can. Shiv continues on the other side. Stay with us.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.